Some monsters are born, some are made. Delphine Lalaurie was both architect and architecture of her own particular horror, a woman who transformed her New Orleans mansion into a laboratory of cruelty while maintaining a facade of aristocratic refinement that fooled even the most discerning members of Louisiana's elite. Born Marie Delphine McCarty in 1787, she entered the world as Creole aristocracy, swaddled in privilege and power. Her early life reads like a primer in antebellum success: wealth, status, marriage, children. But beneath the polished narrative lay something that modern psychologists would recognize as a perfect storm of sociopathy and sadism, wrapped in the suffocating lace of societal expectations. The greatest trick, wrote one of her contemporaries, was not that she hid her nature, but that she displayed it so openly that none dared believe their eyes. The historical record paints her in broad strokes: 3 marriages, each increasing her wealth and status, a reputation for hosting the finest soirees in New Orleans, a string of suspicious deaths among her household slaves that raised eyebrows but never quite enough alarm. But between these official lines lies a darker text, written in blood and bone. Her 3rd marriage to physician Leonard Louis Nicolas Lalaurie gave her something beyond social status. It gave her access to medical knowledge. What began as perhaps mere cruelty evolved into something more methodical, more precise. The mansion's attic became not just a chamber of horrors, but a twisted laboratory where human suffering was studied with clinical detachment. Psychological profiles constructed centuries later suggest a mind that operated on multiple levels simultaneously. She was not simply sadistic, she was curious. Not merely cruel, she was experimental. Each act of torture was documented with a physician's precision, as if she were conducting research into the outer limits of human endurance. The dinner parties she hosted were legendary. While guests dined on fine French cuisine below, unspeakable experiments continued in the attic above. The juxtaposition was not accidental. It was part of her particular artistry. She delighted in the duality, in maintaining the perfect illusion of gentility while orchestrating symphonies of suffering just overhead. To understand Madame Lalaurie, wrote one historian, is to understand that she did not see herself as evil. In her mind, she was simply pursuing knowledge through the only test subjects society would allow her to use. The servants who attended her social functions reported a woman of extraordinary complexity. She could discuss literature in French, politics in Spanish, and medicine in English, all while calculating the precise amount of pain a human body could endure before surrendering to death. Her intelligence was as remarkable as her capacity for cruelty. The attic itself became a character in her story, a space transformed from simple storage into something approaching a medieval torture chamber, crossed with a medical theater. Survivors' accounts describe implements of torture arranged with the same care she used to arrange flowers at her dinner parties. Everything had its place, its purpose, its particular role in her grand experiment. Modern forensic psychologists would likely diagnose her with a unique combination of antisocial personality disorder and scientific obsession. She was not content merely to cause pain. She wanted to understand it, catalog it, perhaps even perfect it. Each victim was a case study in human suffering, documented with the same precision she used to record her social engagements. The fire that eventually exposed her atrocities on April 10, 1834, started in the kitchen, but some said it was hell itself, reaching up to claim its own. When firefighters and neighbors broke down the doors to help extinguish the blaze, what they found defied description. Human experiments in various stages of transformation. Victims who had been subjected to primitive surgical procedures, bodies contorted into positions that mocked natural anatomy. Yet even in exposure, she maintained her composure. Witnesses described her standing in her nightgown, watching her mansion burn, more concerned about her furniture than the human beings who had suffered under her roof. This was perhaps her most terrifying quality, not the capacity for cruelty, but the ability to remain utterly unmoved by its discovery. Her escape from justice became part of New Orleans folklore. Some say she fled to Paris. Others claim she remained hidden in Louisiana, protected by family connections. The truth, like so much about Madame Lalaurie, remains shrouded in mystery and shadow. The psychological impact of her crimes rippled through New Orleans society like poison in a well. Here was proof that monsters wore silk gowns and hosted dinner parties, that evil could hide behind the most respectable facade. The implications were almost too terrible to contemplate. If someone like Madame Lalaurie could exist, who else might be harboring similar secrets behind their mansion walls? Her legacy lives on in more than just ghost stories and tourist attractions. She became a symbol of the dark potential that lurks beneath civilization's veneer, a reminder that true horror often wears a beautiful face and speaks in cultured tones. The mansion at 1140 Royal Street still stands, renovated and repurposed, but never quite cleansed of its history. Visitors report strange sensations, sudden cold spots, unexplained sounds, the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. Perhaps these are merely the natural reactions of minds confronting a space where such atrocities occurred, or perhaps something more lingering remains. In her private writings, discovered years after her disappearance, she wrote, "Science requires sacrifice. Progress demands pain. History will understand what my contemporaries cannot." The words are written in an elegant hand, the same hand that would later guide implements of torture with surgical precision. The final confirmed sighting of Madame Lalaurie was in Paris, where she reportedly lived until her death in 1849. But some say she never truly died, that her spirit returned to New Orleans, to the mansion that had been her laboratory and her legacy. The roses still bloom at 1140 Royal Street, their petals a shade too red, their perfume a note too sweet. And sometimes, in the dead of night, when the moon casts shadows like surgical instruments across the garden, visitors swear they can hear the scratch of a pen, making notes, documenting some eternal experiment that never quite reached its conclusion. And in the attic, something waits, patient as science, hungry as history, wearing a face that might have been beautiful once before it learned to smile at screams.